I've lived in Florida for most of my life. My parents moved down when I was really little, and I just never left once I moved out. I've got no problems with the place. More recently, I moved to Orlando to get some more independence. I had been living pretty close to my parents in Tampa, so I wanted to have a little space. Plus, I heard that Orlando had a great nightlife, and I like to go out most weekends. I would eventually regret my decision, though. It was all because of this one night on New Year's Eve. I still didn't really know anybody in that area, so I decided to just party at a local outdoor bar to ring in the new year. It seemed as good a plan as any. I got to the bar fairly early since I didn't have anything else to do. I figured I'd be able to get shit-faced before midnight and have a great time. It was pretty chill, and I was having a good time. I never minded sitting alone. As the night went on, it started to get pretty crowded. Everyone was anticipating the countdown and getting excited for midnight. People started dancing and going crazy, and it began to feel like a real party. I was already pretty drunk, so I got pumped up easily. I danced in the crowd for a while and kept heading back to the bar for more drinks. I was extremely drunk by then and having a great time. It was getting closer and closer to midnight, and everyone could feel it. The place was electric. On my third time at the bar, I grabbed a beer and leaned against the bar for a second, looking back into the crowd. Then, out of nowhere, some crazed man bumped into me from the side and began yelling at me.
Why the hell are you staring at my wife?
I told him I had no idea what he was talking about, but he just kept screaming in my face. I was scared of what might happen as the guy was really big and creepy looking. He was obviously looking for trouble, and I didn't want to be involved in any of it. I tried to tell him that I didn't want any problems, but it didn't seem to do any good. Then, the man got all up in my face like he wanted to deck me. I was still freaked out by the guy, but I didn't like being pushed around. I started to tell him to get the hell away from me. I wasn't gonna let some lunatic ruin my night. That's when I noticed that he had one hand in his pocket. I didn't know if he had a weapon in there or what, but I wasn't about to find out. I thought fast and offered to buy him a drink as a peace offering. I was only planning on buying him a beer, but the man demanded that I buy him several shots. I agreed since I didn't want any smoke. The guy drank all the shots and then finally headed back into the crowd after giving me another threatening look. I sobered up real quick after that. I had clearly dodged a bullet. That guy had totally killed my buzz though, and for no reason at all. He had to be some kind of psycho. I tried not to let it get me down, but I didn't really feel like partying after that. I headed back into the crowd in the opposite direction of the man and chilled by myself in a corner. I didn't want to leave before midnight, but I also didn't want to run into that guy again. So I just drank my drink and waited for the countdown. I figured I would leave right after since the man had basically ruined my night. Countdown eventually happened and everyone went wild and celebrated together. It was difficult for me to be that excited though. I was still irritated by the altercation from before. I tried to get into it since I had been there all night, but it just wasn't the same. After a few minutes, I started to head home. Then, something disturbing happened. As I turned to leave, the crowd's cheers suddenly turned to sounds of panic. People started screaming in fear and a whole frenzy broke out. It was total chaos. Something was happening in the middle of the crowd, but I couldn't figure out what. Everyone was pushing each other out of the way and leaving the bar as fast as they could. It was like a stampede. I still didn't know what was going on, but I got the hell out of there and ran towards my house. Once I was far enough away from the bar to where I felt like it was safe, I stopped running and called an Uber to take me the rest of the way. My heart was still pounding. The Uber picked me up shortly after and I made it home without any trouble. The whole night ended up being a complete disaster. I had never been happier to make it home. The next day, I checked the news to see if I could find out what had happened that night. It was revealed that there were multiple stabbings in the crowd. Allegedly, 3 people had been injured. I couldn't believe that I had been so close to such a horrific event, but then it got even more disturbing. The suspect in the stabbings was the same man who had approached me before. 2 of the victims were just randoms who happened to be close to the man, but one of them turned out to be his own wife. It was suspected that he had started slashing his way through the crowd so that he could get out quicker after seeing some cops nearby. Apparently, he was paranoid that the cops would arrest him. The police were still looking for him the next day. I've been traumatized ever since, and I don't really go to bars anymore. I still can't believe how close I came to being one of the victims. The story was inspired by a horrific New Year's Eve celebration that happened in 2017. A Florida man named Robert Messerli had been charged with stabbing 3 people at a crowded New Year's Eve celebration outside a Daytona beach bar. It was reported that the man started swinging a pocket knife outside the Full Moon Saloon because he was startled after seeing officers in the area. He said he started swinging the knife so he could leave the crowd. Police said Messerli's fiancée and 2 other people suffered non-life-threatening stab wounds. The man was charged accordingly since.
Last New Year's, my husband and I went downtown to see our city's midnight fireworks show. We took an Uber from our house so we could have a few drinks and enjoy ourselves for the celebration. The fireworks show was as pretty as always, and afterwards, we were having such a great time that we decided to stay out later. We got some delicious hot dogs from a street vendor and had a couple more drinks. Then we partied the night away until it was 2 in the morning and the whole event was wrapping up. We were some of the last people to leave, so it took a while to get another Uber home. It was really late when we finally got in, and I was beat. All I wanted to do was crash on the bed and fall asleep next to my husband. However, when we got into the bedroom, he locked the door and refused to lay down, which made me think he was about to try something else. It took me a moment to realize that nothing like that was on his mind. He stared at me with a really unsettling look on his face and said, "I'm hungry. Let's go get some food."
Huh? You're crazy. We just ate an hour ago.
Well, I'm hungry again. Let's go out.
Just eat something in the house.
No, I have a craving. I need tacos from that one place. At first, I thought he was being ridiculous. The hot dogs we got from that guy on the street were huge and piled with toppings. Nobody could be hungry after eating one of those unless they had the munchies. But I knew that all we had was a few drinks. The more I got annoyed with him and tried to convince him to stay inside, the more adamant he became in return that we had to go back out, all the way downtown. At one point, he ordered another Uber while I was still in bed. I got mad at him for spending money on a ride I didn't want to take, but he didn't return the anger. He started begging me to go like it was the most important thing in his life. I could hear it in his voice that he was being serious, even though it still didn't make any sense. I had never heard him grovel like that before under any circumstances. That's when I gave up and put my shoes back on. But even after I agreed to go out with my husband again, he was still on edge about something. I was worried that it had become some kind of stupid fight. It was New Year's night, and we were supposed to be having a good time. No bickering with each other. That wasn't the way I wanted to start the year off. Unfortunately, in the back of my head, I knew something was up with him, but I didn't have a clue what it was. He wouldn't take his eyes off me the whole time we waited for the Uber, and he just stood there like a statue until it was waiting for us outside. When it was finally there, he grabbed my hand and barged through the bedroom door. We rushed out of the house like we were late for our own wedding, except he dragged me out the back door instead of going out the front, which was much closer. Once outside, we walked around the side of the house and climbed into the Uber. As the Uber drove off, my husband stared at our house through the window until it was out of sight. Once he was sure we were gone, he said something I'll never forget. I wasn't hungry. There was a man in the house. I fell silent in disbelief when he told me everything. He said the man was naked and wearing a mask, and that we had walked right past him in the dark. I didn't actually believe any of it was true, but my husband called the cops and told the Uber to let us out on the sidewalk. We waited down the street from our house until the cops arrived and searched it. The man was gone by the time they arrived. For a moment, everybody thought my husband was crazy, and I almost did too, until he pulled up the footage from the camera we have at our front door. What I saw made my blood run cold. There we were, stumbling in through the door and going straight to the bedroom without bothering to turn on the light. And right behind us in the corner was the man my husband saw, naked except for a mask, and holding a knife in his hand. We were completely oblivious to him when he was just inches away. He could have taken us by surprise, and we wouldn't have stood a chance in the state we were in. My husband said he only saw the man right as we were going into the bedroom and looking back to make sure he locked the door. That's why he was so disturbed when he locked us in the bedroom. I'm thankful that he kept his cool and was able to get me out of the house without setting me or the intruder off. It's also a good thing we had a couple cameras in the house to prove that he was there. Otherwise, it's possible nobody would ever believe my husband. We only had a few at the time, but of course, We have total coverage inside and out now. The one thing I still don't understand after all this time is why that creep didn't do anything. Maybe he just wanted to sneak in and watch. Or maybe when the time came to attack us, he couldn't work up the courage. My husband tells me not to spend too much time and energy trying to understand the thoughts of a crazy person, but I can't help it. Maybe if the creep had ever been apprehended, I wouldn't worry so much. Unfortunately, he's still at large, and probably still sneaking around the dark corners of people's houses for whatever sick and twisted reason he has. On December 31st, 2015, an Alabama couple found something really creepy going on outside their home. They discovered a man with no clothes, wearing only a Ronald Reagan rubber mask, wandering around outside their home. The nude man had just entered the breezeway of the house when he was discovered by Danielle Yancey and her husband Bart. Once they noticed him, they began yelling at him, prompting the man to flee away. The couple were later able to show police surveillance footage of the suspect, but cops were never able to find the naked Ronald Reagan. Being a single mom is hard. I raised my son on my own from the very beginning. His father had pretty much left as soon as he was born. It was difficult, but I worked my ass off to provide for my boy. It was a joy at first. I loved being a mom, but as my son grew up, it got a lot harder. The problem was that my son was a lazy piece of shit. He was in his 20s and still lived with me. He didn't seem to mind either, because he'd been like that his whole life. He never wanted to do anything except lay around and play video games all day. I tried to make him get a job, but nothing I said ever did any good. He just seemed content to mooch off me for the rest of his life. He never helped around the house either. I asked him to clean stuff up while I was at work, and then I would come home to find everything just how I left it. So I was stuck working, cooking, and cleaning for 2 people every day. It was pretty horrible. One year, around New Year's, I was so tempted to kick his ass out. I was cleaning the house and decided to pack up some boxes with books and other things that I wanted moved to the attic. The boxes ended up being really heavy, so I asked my son to move them for me. But of course he refused. He actually got mad at me for asking him to help. It was so frustrating. I almost kicked him out right then and there. I didn't really think he would actually leave though. That was just how it always was. I always nagged him about getting a job or helping out more, but he was a brat and never did anything I requested of him. I provided everything for him, and he couldn't do one thing for me. He would sometimes respond so erratically when I nagged him that I was honestly convinced he had mental issues. What was even more disturbing than his laziness was his fascination with weapons. He kept dozens of them in his room. Knives, swords, even an axe. The axe was the weirdest thing. It didn't seem like something a normal person would collect. I just allowed it to. I didn't really have a choice. I knew that he was a psycho and would snap if I tried to take the weapons away. I told myself that it wasn't that strange for a young guy to collect blades, so I didn't kick him out. I felt obligated to continue taking care of him. He was still my son, even if he was lazy. That same year, I decided to invite the family over for New Year's. I wanted to celebrate with people who would actually talk to me. The last New Year's, my son had stayed in his room the whole night, and I had to celebrate alone. Everyone came over and we had a great time, but my son acted weird the whole night. I was surprised that he actually came out of his room and joined the party, but he really didn't participate. He kind of just stayed in the corner and stared creepily at people. Everyone else in the family was used to it though. They all kind of just tolerated him. Either they thought he had mental issues, or they just considered him a lazy incel who stayed at home and never worked. After the party, everybody went home and I was left with just my son again. I was feeling especially annoyed with him because I had listened to everyone else talk about what their children were doing the whole night. It made me embarrassed that my son couldn't even move some boxes for me, so I asked him to move them again. I told him that if he wanted to live in my house, then he was going to have to start helping out. Not only did he refuse to move them, he started throwing a fit over it. He actually started yelling and cursing at me. I was so fed up I just went to my room and tried to sleep it off. I could still hear him yelling and going manic in the other room. There was even a crash like he was breaking shit. I was so scared because he had never gone this crazy before. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to go to bed and ignore it. It took me a while, but I eventually fell asleep. A few moments later, I woke up to the sound of my door opening. I opened my eyes to see something absolutely terrifying. My son was standing over me with a crazed smile, holding his axe. He was laughing like a psycho and looked insane. Before I could say anything, he started moving towards me.
Son, what are you doing? Ah! Ah! Ah!
A neighbor called the police and they arrived at the house soon after. They found the son inside. He was covered in blood and still laughing like a lunatic. He wouldn't say where his mother was. The police searched the house and found no sign of her. Then, an officer found some bags outside near the garbage bins containing human remains. And next to it, there were a few heavy cardboard boxes. The same boxes the mother had been asking the son to move to the attic. The son was arrested and charged for the slaying of his mother, which made headlines as this turned out to be a horrific New Year's. On the New Year's Eve of 2014, a 23-year-old man named Christian Gomez was spending the holiday with his family, including his mother, 48-year-old Maria Suarez Casagne. Allegedly, Casagne had repeatedly asked Gomez to move some boxes to the attic. He later told police that his mother had been nagging him for days about the boxes, and got so annoyed of his mother's nagging that he took matters into his own hands. It was alleged that the man used an axe to take out his mother in the most gruesome fashion and dumped her remains outside by the trash. Once the police arrived, they found his mother's head inside one of the trash cans. Gomez was later charged for his heinous actions.